on the theme State, Policies, and Development. We are having a very successful international webinar organized by the Naga Scholars Association. And I'm sure you are greatly, we all are greatly enriched by the different sessions. This evening, we have exciting topics lined up with 6 distinguished speakers. And I'm sure we will be benefited tremendously from this session again. Nagas have been going through a transition. On the one hand, the Naga nationalism have come a long way to, and it's ready to ink the final settlement with India. On the other hand, due to prolonged conflict, the economic life of the Nagas is badly battered. Only after the signing of ceasefire agreement in 1997, we saw some normalization of the situation, and a baby step started to take shape in the economic life of the Nagas. I am very optimistic that once the Naga political issue is settled, we will witness a positive transformation in the field of development, economy, social-cultural relations, gender justice, etc. So without wasting much time, let me briefly introduce the personalities involved in this session. Firstly, let me introduce our chair for today's session. We have Dr. Mimi Kevichusa Izong as the chair. She is an associate professor and the head of department, the Department of Dinidie, Nagaland University. She is expert in linguistics. She has a very impressive academic contribution. I will not give you all the details for the sake of time. She has published numerous articles in leading journals and a few poems, and also presented papers in various national and international forums. We are indeed privileged to have her this evening to chair this technical session. And we have the first presenter in Dr. Rayleigh Ricky Zipao. He is an assistant professor of sociology in the Central University of Punjab. He was also a Raghunathan Family Fellow in the Harvard University for postdoc. He has published papers in journals of South Asian development, and Asia ethnicity, strategic analysis, economic and political weekly, and also contributed papers, chapters in books. He is the author of Infrastructure of Injustice, State and Politics in Manipur, and Note is published by Routledge, London and New York in this year. The second speaker will be Sachoiba Inka. He is a research scholar. He is currently a doctoral candidate in the Center for Indo-Pacific Studies in the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. The third presenter will be Tejal Hoko. He is also a doctoral candidate in the Center for Historical Studies, School of Social Sciences, JNU. And the fourth presenters are Pansy Jami and Shubham Verma. Pansy is a doctoral candidate in the Center for Canadian, US, and Latin American Studies in the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And her co-presenter is Shubham Verma. She is also from the same center in the university. The fifth presenter is my colleague, Amongla N. Jamir. He's an assistant professor in Fazal Ali College, Mokokchung. She is also currently a doctoral candidate in St. Joseph University, Dimapur. She is a prolific writer and researcher, a frequent contributor in Economic and Political Weekly and the Hindu newspaper, especially in the areas of electoral politics. She has published various papers in journals and in edited books. She has also completed many, quite a lot of research projects. And the last but not the least presenter is going to be Dr. Tembentang. He's a bureaucrat, yet he's keenly interested in academics. He's an officer in the Department of Finance, Government of Nagaland, and he has published a good number of papers in journals and edited books, and also the author of a historical fiction between lived dreams and lived realities. We have reporters in Dr. Chupentang Yantan from the Center of Russian and Central Asian Studies, SIS, School of International Studies, JNU, and Yihing Lei is also a doctoral candidate in the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research in Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi. Just one request. In order to save time, we can make use of the chat box for Q&A. If we get time, then we will also take up at the end of the, towards the end of the session. Now I give time to our chairperson, Dr. Mimi Kevichus-Izu.
Thank you, Dr. Chupentang. We are here in one of the sessions of the seminar which has been organized by the Naga Scholars Association, and it's titled Nagas in the 21st Century, and it's really exciting to be a part of this, and I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be a part of it as a chairperson. And definitely, as you had said, I am a linguist, so I am really out of my comfort zone in this area. So I'm having a moment of dépaysement, as you say in French, when you say that you are out of your comfort zone. But we have a lot of researchers and experts in this area, and I'm sure we will have a wonderful time together with exciting like papers. So to start off with, as you had said, we have Riley Rocky Zapao with the title Infrastructuring Indo-Naga Myanmar Borderlands, Dialectics of Development, Secularization, and Act East Policy. Yeah. And so this session is titled State Policies and Development. And I think it is a very interesting and something which the society needs at this moment. So I hand over the time to Dr. Riley Zapao. Welcome.
So much.
And let us try to stick to the time. So you have 15 minutes.
All right. I'll finish 13 minutes. So
15 minutes, 1-5. Then I will let you know when 12 minutes is up. All right. So, so that you can wind up. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for generous introductions, and thank you, chairpersons. In fact, there is a slight error in the title of my paper. It's not dialectic and development, but it's dialectics of development, securitizations, and Act East policy. Just to make this little clarification, just to be on the same board. So in fact, this paper is a very lengthy paper. It's a forthcoming in Asian ethnicity. So what I'm going to do is that partly I'll read out and partly as a part of the conversations I'm going to carry forward this. So in this paper, I'm making two very simple arguments in the sense that the Indo-Myanmar borderland elicits the case of nation-state constructions as opposed to what Leibniz has argued that geographical space as a socially construction. Then my second argument is as such that there is a dialectics of development, securitizations, Act East policy, and also free region movement in concerning to about the development initiatives in the context of Indo-Naga Myanmar borderland. So here to begin with, frontier tribes or Naga tribes inhabiting the Indo-Myanmar borderlands are at the fringe of the nation state. They remain outside the radar of connectivity and development. The international boundaries line demarcated during the colonial rule pierces through the middle of many villages, and this was reinforced by the post-colonial Indian and Myanmar state, thus deepening the contestations between state and tribal society. Pointing towards the 50 meters odd unfinished fencing at the Indo-Naga Myanmar international border near pillar number 146, the Pangsha village chairman said, they have distorted our foreparents' land and territory. Fencing is an issue, not a peace process. Fencing is not a fructifying exercise for people on both sides of the border. We have been living together for ages without any fencing, and we know exactly to what extent our land belongs to. We don't need fencing. Rather, we need good roads that take us to market and our Zoom field on time and regular electricity supply to our village. Unquote. This vividly condenses the international boundary fencing and material politics encountered by border tribes in everyday life. So my paper in some extent echoes to what Reeves calls the other progressive state attempt to fix new borders. Discursively and materially in regions where administrative boundaries have been moved and debated, asserted and ignored for long. My paper also unfolds what the Navroz Yassin calls a progressive intensification of state presence and absent at the Indo-Naga Myanmar border through the building or unbuilding of new national infrastructure in the form of multiple new phases of the state. This includes like custom office, border guards, fencings, and trade initiatives. So Naga tribes in frontier area, which is the focus of this paper, has been experiencing and continues to experience state subjugation, underdevelopment, and border making in the form of fencing and securitization since colonial period. The modern concepts and category of trans-border tribe, borderland communities, the international boundary line, among others, have been that were alien to tribes have now become the constructed and imposed reality in post-independent era. Thus, social realities emerging from these societies are subsumed and denigrated within the larger statist narrative and discourse. This points to what Bowantora de Santos called epistemicides and inferiorized alternative epistemologies stemming from lived experience and sheer historiographies of tribes. So theoretically, this paper is located in Bodhi and Zipau's conceptions of land and territory. They posit that the lands, often being the foundational base, is conceived as being alive. The language, culture, and tradition manifesting from land are dynamic and alive. Territory, which is generally holistic, constitutes hills, rivers, natural and mineral resources, air, water, and people who closely inhabit it. Each of these processes is conceived fundamentally as sublime living entities, all alive, dynamic, and changing. Tribals have an intrinsic symbiotic connections between their identity, land, and territory. So drawing from my field work and review of secondary literature, my analysis give primacy to border infrastructure within the development and borderland discourse. I'm going to skip the parts on the Nagas with or without borders because this mostly deals in the aspects of about the constructions of the border territorializations and also the prisons and the state making process. So these are more in historical in nature. Rather, I'm going to go straight to what I call this developmental states project and tribes. So it is interesting in this aspect to observe the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 that symbolized free mobility, where it envisaged a country with a border or wall and a holistic landmark for reunification of East and West Germany in 1990. It was perceived that the Cold War would lead to the dismantling of international border fences and walls. However, more such barriers have been built than removed. The US-Mexico border wall built by the President Donald Trump administration, the Indo-Bangladesh and the Indo-Naga-Myanmar border fencing, among others, symbolizes state power and assertions of territoriality. State projects such as building wall of fencing in borderlands across the globe has inverse impacts on socio-political economic relations of borderland communities. And this is also been the case in the context of Indo-Myanmar Naga borderlands. So it is here the Indian developmental state during the Nehru years was seen primarily as an engine of production, especially active in the production of essential industrial capacities and in creating infrastructure. However, the Nehruvian state that embark on rapid industrializations and infrastructure development also leads to disempowerment of certain communities in India in the form of displacement and dislocation, particularly tribes in India. So here it is very interesting to note the statistic or data as per the government of India. Between 1951 and 1990, development projects, dams, mines, factories, and wildlife sanctuaries are estimated to have displaced a little over 21 million people. Out of these 21 million people, as many as 8.54 millions have been enumerated as tribals. So if we look in the context of this displacement, more than 40% of the total displaced people constitute that of tribals. And this has a bearing on infrastructural development. Virginius Kaka and noted sociologists aptly demonstrate that the national objective of building productive infrastructure for future growth and resource mobilizations was seen as far more important than the issue of tribal welfare. Indeed, more often than not, the policy of national development was at odds with the policy of tribal interests and welfare. And the latter was invariably sacrificed in the name of national development. Similarly, with Sabyasachi writing on the struggles of the Adivasi in India and the backdrop of new liberal development policy, posits that across the land and bride of India, Adivasis are opposing regimes emerging from a combination of a process of the state, the market, and corporate organizations. In the light of India's development experience in post-economic reform period, especially concerning trade, the state effectively aided corporate world in deepening the profit-driven extractive resources in tribal belt and trampling the process of every safeguard and protection provided in the constitution and law. Kaka termed this process as coercive development. So the interest of the Indian state in securing the Northeast has activated various infrastructure projects, among which road construction, hydropower project, international fencing are the key elements. It prays into the service of Indian military for road construction and other development projects in the regions. So the development policies and project in Northeast as initiated by the Indian state foregrounds heavily on security approach, or in other words, strategies for counter-insurgency and new liberal market-driven motives for transnational engagement as opposed to people-centric approach. Here to
Okay, Dr. Riley, you have 2 more minutes.
Sure, I'll conclude and come back to my core argument in that. I'll just conclude within 2 minutes. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So in conclusions, I would like to point out that, as I said, the frontier tribes are subjected to continuous harassment by the agent of the state, like the border police, custom official, intelligence, etc. The development initiatives undertaken by the state are more of a security-centric, suitable for trans-territorializations rather than the well-being of the borderland communities. Voters exclusively theorize this social reality as Nagaland developmentalism was used to co-opt and corrode the perceived internal threat of Naga insurgency, unquote. Border fencing at the Pangsha village and multiple joint Indo-Myanmar army operations point to this direction. Thus, the frontier Naga tribes such as Konya, Kemugan, and others are caught in the crossroad between the power of the sovereign state and under development. The defunct international trade centers became a symbolic and dyadic international relations that did not serve the interests of the local communities nor boost the national economy. Development from a tribal perspective embodies the idea of consensus, the questions of participatory processes, the concept of equality, the deepening of democracy, the realizations of justice, and the foundation of a just society. The tribal intellectual collective India calls this process as development with justice. So quickly to summarize, the international boundary line as demarcated by the colonial imaginary wall and reinforced by the post-colonial Indian and Myanmar state became the point of contestation between the state and tribal society in contemporaneous borderland discourse. However, the central dialectic in this whole process of development fiasco stemming from the borderland or the frontier lies between the connectivity infrastructural discourse, the Act East policy, border fencing, and free movement regimes. There is an imminent contradictions in policy as all these processes does not seem to be in consonance with each other. Instead, one observes an asymmetrical process between AEP, FMR, commitments to infrastructure building and border fencing. This probably points to some degree of insecurity of the nation state, India and Myanmar, although it has stated its vision statement for open trade, free mobility, and deepening infrastructure development. And yet, on the ground, the actions are still guided by securitizations of development and underdevelopment. This has been the unstated policy for the tribal areas in Northeast India. Thus, the visions of the Act East policy is contradicted fundamentally by the state security and development agenda, in which securitization is the priority development, or simply the securitizations of an insecure state in the borderland. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Raleigh, uh, for that interesting talk. And I think we will be having some questions later on after all the papers have been presented. And thank you for keeping the time. So the next paper is, I call Sachoiba Inca.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And the title of his paper is Role of Ethnic Communities in Indo-Myanmar Relations, with special reference to the Nagas, 1991 to 2018. Okay, your time starts now. Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. Yeah, the title of my presentation is Role of Ethnic Communities in Indo-Myanmar Relation, with special reference to Nagas. The time frame is 91 to 2018. This is a preliminary finding, so I would like to welcome comments and suggestions as well. I've divided my presentation into four. There is factors for inclusion of Northeastern states in Indian foreign policy making, role of Nagas in Indo-Myanmar relation, political condition of the Nagas in Myanmar, and challenges. The Northeastern region has not been a major factor in Indian foreign policy calculation since independence, but the liberalization of economy in the 90s in the wake of globalization gave India a new outlook, and the Look East policy, which was rechristened as Act East policy, was a paradigm shift in India's engagement with Southeast Asian nations as it seeks to explore the benefit of ASEAN. The reorienting of this Indian foreign policy to neighborhood first, which is further widened to include extended neighborhood, have made the Northeastern state a key player in Indian participation in regional groupings such as SAARC, BIMSTEC, Mekong-Ganga Cooperation, and BCIM. According to Behuria, India does not have a well-defined neighborhood policy. India has largely adopted an ad hoc and bilateral approach vis-a-vis its neighbors and has allowed its policy to be guided by an overwhelming concern for security. In recent years, India's approach has changed considerably. India is yet to evolve a long-term forward-looking vision for the region and adopt a strategy spelling out its priorities and concern clearly and openly declaring its expectation from its neighbor. In recent years, the states are becoming a central player in India's engagement with its neighbor. Nevertheless, the role of states is still limited, as the Constitution of India provides overriding power to the center to legislate even on matters falling under the purview of states listed as provided in Schedule 7 of the Indian Constitution. In October 2014, the government announced the creation of new state division within the Ministry of External Affairs, which is to be headed by the rank of a joint secretary. This was the first initiative to give primacy to the states in Indian foreign policy framing. We could quickly look at the factors for the inclusion of Northeastern states in Indian foreign policy making. The first one can be sharing of international border with Bangladesh, China, Bhutan, and Myanmar, which is about 98% of its border. Second can be social cultural ties with the neighboring countries, which the paper is focused on. And there are two events that awakened the consciousness of Indian government about the geostrategic importance of the Northeastern states, the Indo-China War of 1962 and Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. And China still play a major role in India's outlook towards the Northeast, as they have been against the visit of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, the case of staple visa, building of dams, and other defense pact with neighboring countries. And the fifth one is trade and commerce. The Northeast Vision 2020 outlined the need for inclusive growth and rural development, and drove the immediate priority to build required infrastructure right up to border areas, establishing connectivity and communication links to the cross-border points through which trade and economic exchanges with the countries neighboring the Northeastern region, so that foreign policy initiative blend seamlessly with the national economic development requirements. Role of ethnic communities in Indian-Myanmar relation. There are numerous communities in Northeast who have ethnic relation across the border, but the establishment of modern nation state by cutting across geographical boundaries have rendered these communities in different countries often cut off from each other in total. This bifurcation of territories without the knowledge and consent of the people settling in border areas has given rise to discontentment, resulting in insurgency and other conflicts. The Naga lives in parts of Manipur, Assam, Nagaland, and Arunachal Pradesh in India, and Kachin State and Sagang region in northern Myanmar. The Naga Hills were divided by the Anglo-Burmese Sihanouk Agreement in 1826 and later in 1953 under Indo-Burmese demarcation in Kohima by Jawaharlal Nehru and U Nu. India's engagement with Myanmar was limited after 1962 military coup, but the introduction of Look East policy by Narasimha government and the government in 1991 were faced with challenge in relation to Myanmar and insurgency in the Northeast was becoming a very serious challenge once again. Cooperation with security force of Myanmar was warranted. As a result, in 1993, the then Foreign Secretary Jane Dixit visited Yangon to meet all the Burmese top military chiefs, and India officially agreed not to interfere in the internal affairs of Myanmar and vice versa. This meeting led to India's regional civil authorities signing of cross-border trade in 1994, Myanmar-India joint drug control meeting, which bring together the representatives from Myanmar, from Mizoram, Nagaland, Manipur, and Chin and Saigon division of Burmese side. And this also led to the number of joint military operations. The first one is Operation Golden Bird, which happened in 1995, which was aimed to flush out NNCN, Alpha, NDFB, etc. And the second one can be military is the Operation Lease. And the third was conducted in 2000. A joint operation was conducted by the two forces. The then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and National Security Advisor Brajesh Mishra then decided to utilize military diplomacy to supplement India's foreign policy. And the fourth was cross-border operation, which was conducted in 2015, and the joint military operation called Operation Sunshine 1, 2, and 3, which were conducted in 2019 and currently is ongoing. Apart from this military engagement, there were other civil engagement as well. When the Prime Minister of India, Manmohan Singh, visited Myanmar in 2012, The need for special focus on development and prosperity of the people in bordering areas were identified by bringing about overall socio-economic development in the border areas by undertaking both infrastructure development and microeconomic projects, including upgradation of roads and construction of schools, banks, health center, huts, bridges, agriculture, and related training activities and culture exchange program, CEP, in the area in accordance with the MOU on India-Myanmar border area development. India also offered assistance in the production of large cardamom in the Naga self-administered zone. Chief Minister of Nagaland, Rio, visited Myanmar in 2014 and also acknowledged the government of India for giving an aid package of $25 million to Myanmar for the development of border regions, especially the Naga areas. And a 10-member delegates from Myanmar led by Chief Minister of Sagang, U Thai Ai, and CM of Kachin State, U Lazon Ngansai, visited India from 13 November to 7 December 2014, and also participated in the Hornbill Festival in an attempt to facilitate the center's Look East policy. The center has also approved for the setting up of 5 border trade centers along the Indo-Myanmar border in Nagaland, and which is an ongoing project. But this joint venture, as stated by our former speaker, is often met with resistance, especially with the construction of border fence. I think Riley have also pointed out in his presentation. Now we could look at the political condition of the Nagas in Myanmar. The Nagas did not sign the Panglong Agreement in 1947, but they signed the ceasefire agreement with the military government in 2012. They also did not sign the National Ceasefire Agreement, which was signed by around 8 ethnic communities in Myanmar on October 15, 2015. And the Nagas were not part of the 21st Century Panglong Peace Conference, which was hosted by Aung San Suu Kyi in 2016 and 17. If we look at the political representation of Nagas in Myanmar, we have 4 MPs and 6 representatives, but we are still yet to get the official confirmed official report of the recently concluded election, that is this month. Now we look at some of the challenges faced by the Nagas in Myanmar. I think this is important if we are looking at influencing the foreign policy of both the countries. And if we interact with any of the people in Myanmar, the main concern that they usually raise is infrastructure deficit and also tapping of phones. They lack hospitals, roads, internet connectivity, schools, etc. And one interesting thing is they have very weak pressure group, civil society like Council of Naga Affairs, Naga Student Organization, Naga Students and Youth Federation. They are there, but their influence is limited. Political parties, Nagas formed its first political party called Naga Hills Regional Progressive Front and contested the 1990 election, winning 2 seats, but the party was abolished by the military government on March 18, 1991. And just last year, they formed another political party known as Naga National Party, which was registered with Union Election Commission in 1990, which was registered with Union Election Commission in 2019 and fought the recently concluded election as well. Military still plays a major role in Myanmar politics. The 3 important ministries, Defense, Home Affairs, and Border Affairs, are controlled by the military. 25% seats is reserved for the military in the parliament. The military also nominates their members in the Naga self-administered zone as well. Free and fair press is still a concern. Press censorship by the state was also put in question even in the recent concluded election. And to conclude, the realities, perception, and contention of Northeastern state in the foreign policy framework need a wider discourse, as the region has the potential to drive India's diplomatic relations with neighbors and extended neighbors. And incorporating the region by providing a framework for its involvement will close the gap between the domestic and external compulsion, which threatens India's security. In the emerging inclusion of Northeast in India's foreign policy making, New Delhi needs to keep in mind to avoid generalization of the entire region in one policy framework, as every state in the region has different characters. While looking at India's Northeast and China, Arunachal play a dominant role since its borders with China and historical and cultural connect between the two are more than any other state in the region. Subir Bhowmik provide a rare glimpse into how tiny Tripura influenced Indian foreign policy towards East Pakistan and Bangladesh for half a century, and highlights the challenge and opportunities for the northeastern states of India that can be leveraged for economic growth, strategic advantage, and cultural influence on national scale. Likewise, is the case of Nagaland, the state with most complicated ethnic politics and insurgency issue in the region. If we look into at Nagas from a foreign policy perspective, India's relation with Myanmar is important, as Naga reside in these countries. Naga resides in 4 states, including Nagaland, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, and Assam, and 3 of which shares borders with Myanmar. In order to successfully implement the Act East policy, there needs to be a closer coordination with the periphery states. The notion of para-diplomacy should be introduced at the central level, and the states should be encouraged to conduct bilateral relations with the adjoining countries. But in relation to Nagas of India and Myanmar, there is still a trust deficit on both sides, as the Naga insurgency group in Myanmar is also yet to sign the National Ceasefire Agreement. This will continue to hinder cross-border trade and people-to-people connect, which is in turn will hamper the economic stability in the border areas. The interaction level between the government of Nagaland and government of Myanmar is minimal, unlike the relation with the government of Bangladesh and its adjoining Indian states. This has a lot to do with the government of the state concerned and not necessarily with the central government. The success of Agartala doctrine can be a case in point given the willingness of the Naga people across the border. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, are you there? Ma'am, Chair? I think we've lost her.
Hello. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
Please.
So thank you, Saitweba, for keeping within the time. He started at 4:32 and ended at 4:47. So that's very good. That was exactly 15 minutes. Next, our next paper presenter is Tejal Hukor from JNU. And is he ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. So your time starts now.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Due respect to the chairperson, the session organizer, I want to thank the NSA for this privilege and the opportunity to present a paper. My paper is titled Aligning Confusion, History of the Inner Line in the Naga Hills. And it is the contention of this paper that the inner line defied a precise and a fixed definition throughout its long history. The inner line as line in confusion is apparent even from its historiography. The literature on the history of the inner line can be classified into 2 broad categories. The first is the more common and popular understanding, which views the inner line as a benevolent colonial policy to protect the cultural identity of the tribes, their rights over land and resources. And the second is a critique. It is opposed to this first understanding, which views the inner line as primarily an instrument of colonial rule, a political strategy to control the hill tribes and protect the economic investment in the plains. These 2 broad categories, however, ascribe a fixity and a rigidity to the understanding of the inner line, which I want to argue against in this paper. The inner line was extremely flexible, not only in its physical manifestation as a geographical boundary, but also in its latent intent and purpose. there can be no single definition or single understanding of the inner line because it was understood differently by different people at different historical junctures. So instead of dismissing either viewpoint, I want to reconcile these two contradictory and opposing views on the inner line within the understanding of the inner line as a line that was continuously shaped and molded throughout its long history, taking on new forms and purpose to perform new functions. So focusing on the Sibsagar inner line, which was drawn in 1876, and looking at its history of extension, abolition, and subsequent reinstitution as the Naga Hills District inner line, I will attempt to show the instability and flexibility of the inner line, the ambiguities that are inherent within it, and the contradictions that follow its practice. When we talk about the instability and flexibility of the inner line, it is evident in the numerous instances of modification and alterations when the inner line was redrawn to meet the economic interests of the empire. The Sibsagar inner line was modified in 1882. It was modified in 1901, again in 1906, and again in 1910. And every occasion of this modification, on every occasion, the inner line was modified to incorporate valuable forest tract within British administration. And when you talk about the ambiguities that surround the inner line, it is evident. It relates to the implication or effect of the inner line on the territory that fell within and outside the inner line. So the confusion was always there. It was never clear. Is the inner line a territorial boundary or is it a jurisdictional boundary? And should uniform laws be administered in all the territories that fell within the inner line? And is the territory that fell beyond the inner line and the communities who inhabit them to be regarded as independent? These questions continuously troubled the colonial government, and the frontier officers were often baffled by contradictory instructions that came down from the higher authorities. The contradictions of the inner line are also apparent in its failure to live up to its theoretical claims. Broadly summarizing, the inner line made two claims. First is that it represents the territorial limit of capital, and second, that it represents the limits of British administration. The inner line was charged with the task of preventing and stopping tea planters, rubber speculators, and investors from venturing beyond the jurisdiction of British administration. It was intended to prevent the rapid and incautious advance of capital, as scholar Bodhisattva Kar puts it, to provide a theoretical frame to capital. However, as the history of its modification and its extension shows, instead, the inner line became the most potent agent in legitimizing the expansive gains of capital. The inner line set out to tame capital, and in the end, it was tamed by capital. On the claims of inner line as the limits of British administration, the Naga Hills inner line, which was drawn in 1928, dealt the final blow to this claim. Contrary to popular understanding, the Naga Hills inner line was first drawn in 1928. Although the inner line regulation was introduced and it came to force in 1873, an inner line for the Naga Hills district was never drawn until 1928. And it may be noted that until 1928, the inner line was officially understood on paper, though not always on practice. On paper, it was officially understood as the limits of British administration. And by 1910, the Sibsagar inner line, which was bordering on the Naga Hills district, the entire length of the Sibsagar inner line was abolished by 1910 on the grounds that with the formation of Mokokrin subdivision and the gradual extension of the Naga Hills district eastward, the inner line now lay between two administered British districts and therefore no longer serves its purpose as the limits of British administration. So when the discussions for laying down an inner line in Naga Hills district began in 1926, J.H. Hutton, the then Deputy Commissioner of Naga Hills, he recommended the reinstitution of the old abolished Sibsagar line, or failing that, to adopt the western range of hills as the inner line boundary. If, when put into effect, Hutton's inner line would mean that anyone who enters the Naga Hills would be required to take a pass, and this was an outrageous suggestion. It was an unheard of practice in colonial Assam, and it was protested and opposed by the officials in the Assam government, who argued that the purpose of an inner line was to prevent British subjects from going into unadministered areas, not to prevent British subjects from entering British administered area. However, interestingly, Hutton defended his proposed line by reinterpreting the inner line regulations. He introduced a new interpretation of the inner line regulations, and the most significant of it was reinterpreting Section 7 of the inner line regulations, which prohibits any person who is not a native of the district to acquire any interest in land or product of the land beyond the inner line without the sanction of the government. Until this point of time, this provision had only meant that British subjects could not take up land grants beyond or conduct business transactions outside the jurisdiction of British administration. This section was primarily intended to prohibit speculators and investors from entering into contracts with the frontier tribes for land grants independent of the British government. However, Hutton reinterpreted this section to argue for protecting the Aborigines from the ever-increasing pressure of immigration of undesirable population. The discussions on the inner line for Naga Hills district also coincided with the debates surrounding the constitutional reforms proposed by the Statutory Commission that visited India in 1928. During these constitutional debates, Hutton became the most prominent voice advocating for the concept of protection through exclusion, and the formation of excluded areas and partially excluded areas owed a great deal to his persuasive influence. And the inner line, in this sense, provided the territorial frame of protection through exclusion. And not a difference here from the previous 19th century colonial paternalism is that it was not merely, it was not to exclude the tribes from civilization. It was rather an attempt to exclude civilization from the tribes. Thus, by 1936, when the Austrian anthropologist Führer Hemmendorf visited the Naga Hills, the perception of inner line as a regulation that was designed to protect the cultural identity of the tribes had taken deep roots. I want to conclude by summarizing briefly that the history of inner line is a complicated tangle of instability, flexibility, ambiguity, and contradictions. It was a strange regulation which had a very strange history, and a regulation which began as an appropriative tool of the colonial government for resource extraction, and it was transformed into a protective institution with a professed claim of protecting the tribes from foreign culture. This widely different and contradicting understanding of the inner line was made possible by different interpretations of the same regulation. And I want to conclude by hinting at the new functions which are now ascribed to the inner line in the present day, particularly with regard to the extension of inner line to Dimapur in Nagaland. Is the extension of inner line to Dimapur a political strategy to quiet protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act, or is it a line to protect the cultural identity of vulnerable tribes, or is it the appropriation of the urban space by the tribes? Thank you.
Thank you, Tajalupo, and for challenging us with those questions at the end. That is something that we all need to think about. Okay, next we have the fourth paper from Panzi Jami and Shubhan Verma. So this is a joint paper, India's Act East Policy and the Naga Society and Analysis. Are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you, Chairperson and the organizer for this session, and NSA for giving us this opportunity through this platform to present our work. And to do the same, I would like to share my screen as I have a PPT. So is it visible? Like,
Yes, it is.
okay, okay. So the topic for our paper is India's Act East Policy and the Naga Society and Analysis. And as said, it's a joint paper by Panthijani and me. And these are the various subsections that we would be going through. Basically, there are four, and in which the first three would be dealing with the background of the Look East policy, and then how it turned to Act East, and where do we see India's Northeast in the eastward drive of India, and finally the main part of our topic of our presentation, the positioning Nagaland in the active society. So starting, we have like, why did India go for the Look East policy at the first instance? There were internal as well as the external changes happening around. So externally, there was the end of the Cold War, which changed the whole international scenario, and India's very trusted partner USSR, it break into a part and it formed Russia. And on a international stage, India didn't have a reliable partner for its economic growth. Internally, there were liberalization taking place because of the huge balance of payment crisis that we had, and uh, at the same time, the economies in the Southeast Asia, they were having an economic boom, and which attracted India's attention towards these region, towards the Southeast Asian region or ASEAN. So the Prime Minister at that time, PV Narasimha Rao, he came up with this policy in order to attract investment in India through ASEAN, and because of its contiguity factor, the Northeast region was taken up as the launching pad for this policy. It became quite popular to say look it through the Northeast policy. And over the years of its implementation, what did the look east policy achieve for us? In the in the form of new institutional agreements or arrangements, and in terms of trade, it benefited the Indian government. Obviously, the trade between India and ASEAN, it went up from $2 billion in '92 to $72 billion in 2017 after the signing of free trade agreement with ASEAN. And for the Northeast region, there were few developmental projects that were taken up with reference to Asian Highway, the Asian Railway Link, and the natural gas pipeline. But out of these, only the Asian Highway, only a part of it has been able to complete. Rest remains in the process. But in 2014, this look east policy was changed to the act east policy in the scenario of the changing geographical construct happening around the India, which was the Indo-Pacific region. And in order to go with that, the Prime Minister of India came up with this policy to include even the countries of the East Asia, especially Japan and South Korea, to come and invest in the region, especially with reference to the Northeast and Nagaland. We would be coming upon that later. And this activities could be seen through the three sub-regional activities that are happening: the BIMSTEC at the sub-regional level, ASEAN at the regional level, and Indo-Pacific at the global level. And the basic difference between these two policies, however, it remains the same, but the actives policy is it now includes the security and defense aspect. It lays emphasis more on that, while not compromising on the socio-economic cultural cooperation, and it focuses on the infrastructural development within the Northeast region. And also it has a higher profile in the subset of the Indian foreign policy. Also within this, the position of Bangladesh, if we see, it's something to be notable, because because that also falls as a contiguous neighbor to our northeast area, and also Myanmar, we look it at as both immediate neighbor and as a member of the ASEAN. So these two questions remain with the activist policy. How do we deal with them? And quickly going through this slide, Northeast region, it forms a strategic position in India's three subregions: the Himalayan subregion, the Mekong subregion, and the Bay of Bengal subregion. And India launched neighborhood first policy and act east policy, and they had got some really good responses from the smaller neighbors, particularly Bhutan, Nepal, or even Bangladesh. And their main agenda is to build a seamless connectivity through this region, whole region. And While doing so, the Northeast region is obviously clubbed together because of its small size of these states. But in doing so, the dynamic of this region and the genesis of the people is like frequently ignored. Clubbing is also a necessity, but it needs to be done carefully because the individuality of each of these state of Northeast is somehow ignored. Now, and coming to the what these policies have like gained for overall Northeast region, if we see on the ground, not much has been done, and which could also be a factor because of several policies of the Indian government, especially with industrial and investment promotion policy. They dropped in 2014. However, they revised, but no new registrations were taken up. So, how would the region develop without having a robust industrial policy? And also the budgetary allocations, which is a major problem for the Northeast Council and the donor ministry. So all these things, they have somehow been an impediment in the achievement of the realization of goals for the Actist policy for the overall Northeast region. However, now we will quickly come to our main part of the presentation, like positioning Nagaland in the Actist policy. So, a quick background, like Nagaland gained its full statehood after separating from the state of Assam in 1963, and it was placed under the Ministry of External Affairs. By statute law, land and its resources were guaranteed as belonging to its people, and customary socio-cultural and religious practices, they took over precedence over common law as enacted by the parliament. So, uh, these legislative acts has to be ratified first by the state legislative assembly. However, after gaining its statehood due to violent conflicts, Nagaland missed out on the first three 5-year plans and deprived of the benefits of development and infrastructure building through focused planning. And what was more concern was that due to continuous armed conflict, even after the statehood, whatever resources the state was having, it was spent on the security related matters, having little to spend on the development related matters. And such development deficits, they were carried all the way up and leading to backlogs. And whenever there was an opportunity for development, they were speeded up without adequate planning. So that in a way led to a lopsided development. If we see Nagaland as a state, it is quite unique, and it is promising. It has some really good social capital, and if you see its unexploited resources in the form of coal, limestone, cobalt, nickel, and the hydropower generation potential that it has, it is quite good. I mean, for the economic development of the state, it has a variety of flora and fauna, and the bamboo and sericultural industry is slightly coming up. Coming to the social infrastructure part of it, a high literacy rate of 80% and a sizable population which speak English is a very good advantage that the state has. Special mention has to be given about the governance mechanism because these are something which are coming directly from the people, from the local level. If we see the concept of village development boards, which came way much before the establishment of Panchayati Raj in whole of India, it came from the conscious efforts of the government of Nagaland to involve the local people, the villagers, in the development initiatives. So this, and coming out of that only, the Nagaland Communitization of Public Services Act 2002, which gained a global recognition from the UN, in which the government in phases handed over the ownership and management of education, care, water supply, electricity, tourism, and biodiversity conservation to communities. So these two initiatives and mechanism, it shows that when it comes to governance, the government and the people of Nagaland has been able to achieve a self-reliance in the governance schemes. Now, coming to the more focused part of the Actist policy, being a frontier state, Nagaland is very crucial, and it shares a 215 kilometer of border with Myanmar and So trade and commerce, people to people connectivity, it becomes crucial. The central government has established five international trade centers along the Indo Naga Myanmar border. And you could see over here, they are at Longwa in Mon district, Pangsha in Noklak, Nim in Kifre, Mohen Avanku in Phek district. However, out of five, only three are functional, and out of these functional, they are not, I mean, it's very sad to say that, but they are not in a very operationable condition, and they have at best remained the local markets, and their full potential has not been recognized. As it was mentioned by one of the speakers before also, when it comes to the road infrastructure, the which is a very major part in being connected to connect to the region and to cross border trade, development and maintenance of these roads are very important. And in Nagaland there are two highways. One is the Asian Highway number 1, which is which covers Assam, Nagaland, and goes to Manipur, and then to Myanmar, and all the way to Thailand. It was a part of the Kaladan multimodal project, which government pick up the Indo-Thailand road. However, the stretch which is in the Nagaland is also is not in a very good condition. The four laning of highway on the National Highway 29 is also taking place, but there are a lot of problem that happens because of the harsh climatic conditions such as rainfall, landslides, difficult terrain, as well as due to the political and other corruption that exist. There is also a proposal in Nagaland, X-Roads proposal, which is linking the food producing areas of Nagaland with the mineral and oil producing areas and international trade centers, as well as air and rail services of the neighboring states and Myanmar. With when it comes to connectivity, there was a recent summit which happened in 2017 with the by FICCI, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce, and the government of Nagaland. And the theme for the summit was the Act East through Nagaland. And there was a declaration which was adopted, which has 4 points basically. The Northeast Implementation Agency, which would look after all the development projects, the High Powered Northeast Economic Forum, which consists of Chief Minister, other ministers, and other stakeholders to plan out, chalk out strategies for connectivity. Northeast Ring Road, which is connecting all the Northeast states running parallel to international borders, and a connectivity-led infrastructure revolution in the Northeast, which is like basically upgrading the existing infrastructure. So that was the outcome of the summit, and these are basically involved in the declaration. Now, when it comes to foreign investment in Nagaland, which is basically by two countries, Japan and South Korea. So Japan has a historical connection with Nagaland, and now they are. It is one of the few countries which invest readily in the development activities. India has established India-Japan Actist Forum in 2017 with the aim to explore collaboration between the two countries for the developmental activities. And according to the Japan's funding agency, which is JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, there are two ongoing projects in Nagaland in the field of environment and resource management. And for the same, a budget allocation of 400 crore rupees has been already given for the first phase. When it comes to the people-to-people connectivity, there had been student exchange from India to Japan, basically Nagaland to Japan, under the Sakura Exchange Program, which is an initiative of Japan Science and Technology. And when it comes to the road infrastructure, here is a little problem that Japan is keen to develop the road sector in Nagaland, and but it has security concerns for its man and machine, and it has asked for a guarantee from the government of Nagaland for its men and machine to get involved in the improvement of road and developing those, maintaining those. Now, the
Okay,
South
Shubham,
Korean,
you have 2 more minutes
okay,
left.
okay,
Okay.
ma'am. South Korean investment in Nagaland is basically at the special economic zones where they plan to set up an food and agro industry. Nagaland got its first SEZ in 2009, followed by another in 2013. However, the full potential of these economic zones have also not been utilized. And another Korean company, Kogas, which is a second biggest LNG importer, has also expressed interest to invest and explore in the limestone reserves of the state. For Nagaland, another opportunity which is coming in the form of BIMSTEC initiative, sub-regional initiative, and it would be upon the central government of India to resort to the concept of cooperative federalism and cooperative sub-regionalism, and give the states within the Northeast and Nagaland an upper hand in regional diplomacy to chalk out their developmental plans. For I'll just go to some potential and suggestions over here. There is this huge potential that exists, but it should be carefully developed through some industries in Nagaland, especially with respect to forest and horticulture. There should be some value addition to the local products when it comes to trade and commerce. With the trading centers, ITC should be formalized with customs and immigration, and there should be more care should be given to the mineral resources and exploration. The Actist policy has obviously gained some brownie points when it comes to the foreign investment in Nagaland, but a lot needs to be done for the local people of Nagaland and for the state. Uh, so, with that note, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shubham and Pansy, for that paper. Uh, Next, we go to paper number 5 from Amongla N. Jamir, Assistant Professor, Fazul Ali College. The title of a paper is The Misrepresentation of Traditional Institutions in Electoral Competitive Politics with Special Reference to Nagaland. Amongla, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
The time starts
Thank
now.
you so much.
Thank
You
you.
so much, Madam Chair and the organizers, and Mr. Fiobentang, my colleague, and of course, my all esteemed listeners here today and participants. Today, as Ma'am has given the topic already, I will not repeat again. I will divide my paper into 3 parts. The first part will be the discussion on electoral political competition. The second part will be on the recent throwing a little light on the 2 recent elections. And the third part will be on the relationship of traditional institutions and electoral political competition, how far they influence each other. And so, thank you. I'll begin now. If numbers are a window to indicate the level of political competition, then Nagaland presents a very good picture. Because from 2 political parties in 64, to 9 political parties in 2018 assembly elections, and 11 independent candidates, and again from 51% of voter turnout in 1964 election, that is the first election, to again 85% in 2019 Lok Sabha election, speaks or looks very good. However, electoral tables and the data shows rather a different picture. To start, let me give a quick overview about the elections, the 2 recent elections that we have had so far. Lok Sabha election. Now, the winner of the Lok Sabha election from Nagaland always comes from the ruling party in the state, the ruling government, or supported by a coalitional partner of the ruling government. Except an exception was there in 1984 because of instability and breakdown of the government for 4 times. There was an exception, or else till today, the candidate has always been from the ruling government. Now, again, when voters vote, the voters translate the attachment that they have to the state government, but they vote for the Lok Sabha candidate. in the sense they look up to the state government to vote for the Lok Sabha candidate, even though they are voting in the Lok Sabha election. And in fact, the Lok Sabha election can be a curtain raiser for things to come. For the next assembly election, for example, we have in 2023. So the 2019 Lok Sabha election can be a curtain raiser if at all the party allegiances and party connections and the tribal orientations stay like this, as they have formed in 2019. So the tribal strategizing, the party alignments, if it stays, it can go till 2023. And we can predict and we can speculate. So how do we do it? Now, to substantiate my point, I can refer to 2019 Lok Sabha election. Both Lok Sabha election, both candidates from the Lok Sabha election were from the Sema Naga tribe. And if we study the vote share, the vote volatility, then Zaniboto votes from Zaniboto district, from Gokchung district, from Wokha district, from Phek district, from Tuensang area were balanced out. They were equally divided between the two candidates. So one block of vote for one candidate was cut away, balanced out by another block of vote for the other opposing candidate. So there was no clear winner when it comes to the tribal vote share. But the Kohima district, the votes share, the voting pattern of the Kohima district was a little different. A greater chunk of the vote share went to the Congress candidate. Okay, unlike balancing it out. So which means it's the NPF, previously NPF joined Congress. So that might have been a factor without me going so much into the details. And so now, so what was the winning block, the game changer, and that was from the Mon district. Tuensang area was also kind of evenly cut, evenly balanced. So the main voting block, which was positive for the winning candidate, came from the Mon area. And the Mon district is having 9 legislators. And if we are to speculate, then they can still carry on this positive plank for the 2023 legislative elections, and can be a deciding factor if at all the strategizing remains the same. So now, another feature of the electoral competition in Nagaland is the electoral issues and the literature and the manifestos and the programs which are given out for consumption before the election or on the cusp of election is always having a centrist orientation. We cannot tell the difference between this and that, because all the issues are very common within all the political parties. The manifestos are kind of like sharing the same ideology, programs are the same. So we tend to have a little bit of difficulty in trying to understand which party is going to be unique. And on top of that, again, issues which they popularize during elections, it tends to be, or it's not very salient to the voters. To prove this, to substantiate this, I want to bring to your attention the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was previously kept. So when we did a survey on that, then 62% of the respondents were aware of the cap, and the remaining were not aware. And we thought this is going to be a very important game changer for the voters. It will definitely influence their voting decision. But so many had not heard about it. And out of those people who had heard about it, 83% opposed definitely it to become an act. So on propping further on this issue, national issue, which was kind of shaking the world then, at least the country, of course. So we came to know, after propping the variables and all, then we came to know that there is a very high percentage of rural population in Nagaland, semi-rural population. So they don't have an access to information just as we urbanites are having. They don't have a very smooth access to the information provided. And not only that, they don't have smartphones. So the information wouldn't be given to them so well. And because of all these reasons, maybe mainstream issues do not percolate down to the grassroots. They fail to make an impact. So maybe that's because of so it points out to the fact that the issues, national issues, are not salient to the voters here. And not only that, for example, the Rafale deal, that's also an example. Many had not heard about it. At least half of the respondents had no idea about it. And through the Divergers law, political competition in Nagaland gradually streamlines into a bi-party electoral competition. Many multi-parties compete, but it all the competition at the end boils down to only two political parties. So it's more or less a bi-party polarity. Maybe polarity not in terms of ideologies, but polarity in terms of votes. And here in this paper, I'm not discussing about the role played by money, by charisma, by or the issue of India Christian card, which was very prominent, Indian Christian, Hindu Christian, Nagaland Christian tribals, which was very prominent during the elections, or the Naga solution, or the gender issues, which are definitely involved in the competition of power. I'm not discussing that today. Now, um, the point here is um, the I can come. I want to come to the next part of my paper, and that is the traditional institutions and the influence exerted by traditional institutions during elections or on the cusp of elections. And the influence exerted by traditional institutions tends to be very powerful in rural areas and not in the urban areas, and more in the legislative assembly elections than in the Lok Sabha elections. The first past the post system, of course, it comes into play here. So now, when representative democracy, which we are used to now, and our tribal traditional institutions meet, instead of having a symbiotic confluence, it a fault line is created. A fault line is created where the traditional institutions try to influence the electoral competition, the electoral competitive politics. Now, how do they do it? They do it by hiding behind the trust given upon them by the citizenry, and they hide behind traditions, they hide behind indigeneity, and so on. But behind the scenes of this competition, the strings can be pulled by another actor, maybe by some different political actors, by political entrepreneurs, political parties, so on and so forth. Now, just as we have been discussing through by some speakers before me, the colonialists tried to maintain a distant relationship with the Naga chiefs and Naga traditional institutions to win over the whole village, because they had this view that to win over the heart of the village, you have to win the hearts of the chiefs and the traditional institutions. Likewise, today, political actors, political entrepreneurs, influencers, what they do is they try to win over the votes of the village by influencing the traditional institutions. That is the difference only. Or else the same mold has come down, the same mold from the colonial history of treatment rendered towards the tribal chiefs, traditional institutions has come down unbroken. The actors are different, but the nature of it, of the competition, of the influence, of the enticement, of the pressure, of the violence has come down unbroken. So now, um, uh, well, it just as the traditional institutions historically had no choice but to go along with the swim. Superior colonialists, superior culture. So we had no option but to swim along with the current, and we were vulnerable to the exploits of the political actors. So in the same way, the same condition, the same traditions of exploitation of of the exchange of relationship has come down. So now, uh, two very important core questions comes out of this discussion, and that is the first core question can be, why do the traditional institutions from long time back, why are they still vulnerable to the unwanted influences? Back then, in the maybe in the 19th century or earlier, they were vulnerable because of their vulnerability. They were vulnerable because of their vulnerability because you know the situation. So now they were helpless, and they could be definitely influenced, and they had no choice but to go along, and they had to come under the colonialists and go ahead with it. So they were vulnerable. But why are the traditional institutions today still vulnerable to the unwanted influences perpetrated by our own people, for example? To
Excuse me, Amongla. I'm sorry, but I couldn't tell you when your 2 minutes were. I mean, you had left 2 minutes, but can you wind up in 1 minute's time?
okay.
Thank you.
So the second question can be, why do the citizenry allow the village authority to act autocratically? Why do we allow them to act autocratically? And technically, so the answer can be very quickly, ma'am. Um, Technically, the traditional institutions are accountable to none. They hide behind traditions. They hide behind the Indian government. So the village citizenry cannot make them accountable and ask, why are you doing this to us? Because unlike before, they can't do it because they are protected by the Indian law. Now, when the Indian law wants to come to them, then they will say, well, we have Article 371A, you can't do anything. So that is sort of an accountability problem. And the citizens cannot question, of course, because we love our traditional institutions. And we will die for our traditional institutions if given a choice. So this is the kind of like this catch-22 situation where the traditional institutions, after escaping from the lion's mouth, they don't meet the fire. They don't face the fire. So thank you, ma'am, and thank you, listeners.
Thank you, Amongla, for that absolutely eloquent presentation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Okay, next we have Tumbentang Umsoy with the paper Political Economy of Development in Nagaland, Issues and Challenges. Tumbentang, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. All right. You can take your time.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Chairman, for the time. So, I can say my paper is titled Political Economy of Development in Naga, Issues and Challenges. So, what I'm going to do is I'll quickly run through the introduction and then the structure of the paper to provide a sense of how I.
Excuse me, I think your voice is not clear.
Yes.
Okay. Using the
in case if any problem with the voice, you can switch off your video and you can just just do the presentation in case if you face any voice problem.
all right.
Yes, we still cannot hear you, Bentang. Maybe you can try switching off your audio. Sorry, your video.
Am I audible now?
Not really.
Okay. Hello, is it all right now?
Yes, it's better.
Little better, yeah.
Yes, it's better.
So what I'm going to do is I'll quickly run through the introduction to the paper and then the structure of the paper to provide a sense of how I developed the paper, as I'll skip most of the sections and jump to the central arguments of the paper in the hope that I'll be able to complete in my given time. So introduction, the state of Nagaland was created out of a political compulsion with special provisions in the Indian Constitution imported in Article 371A. Safeguards of land and the resources therein, along with the Naga indigenous social, religious, and customary practices, are provided from the laws and policy interventions of the Union Legislature and Executive, save with the concurrence of the state legislature. With statehood, Nagaland was placed in a milieu wherein modern democratic institutions and economic system are to be established side by side with deep-rooted tribal institutions. So this blending of the old and the new creates a sort of duality and often leads to contestations and contradictions within the political, social, and more so in the economic domain. Conflict of interest and contestations, far from being unique to any economy, are often encountered in the development process of an economy. Works of great economists like Adam Smith, Ricardo, Malthus, Marx, and Keynes are often concerned with the study of conflicts amongst and between classes, establishments, and institutions. So the resolution of such conflicts by reorienting institutional frame has been an important aspect of any society's economic headway. The paper attempts to analyze the stagnant economic development in Nagaland, explicated by conjugating macroeconomic indicators to a political economy narrative of conflict and contestation between two sets of institutions, both legitimized by the Indian Constitution, wherein there is an attempt to establish a market-based economy with private ownership grounded on individual rights in a tribal community-based economy with rights and entitlements sanctioned by and through customary and traditional conventions which are constitutionally protected. I contend that the two sets of structures operate in varying degrees at different levels of the society. The modern institutions of market-based economy operate largely in the urban space, where individual property rights are increasingly being well defined and are thus enforceable, while the traditional value system, customary laws, and other tribal community institutions still dominate the rural space. The conflict arises when the state attempts to create the former in the latter in the appellation of economic development. So my paper is structured as follows. First section, which I just read, was an introduction to the study. Section 2 spells out the data limitations and the pressings of the paper, and then moves on to discuss the going received notions of development among the state's educated and political section, which I'll skip. Third section presents an analytic description of Nagaland's economy by means of broad macroeconomic trends, which I'll skip, and then the failure of a free market-based approach to development in a tribal community-based economy is posited in section 4. So this is the central argument of my paper, which I will discuss in length. So two case examples are cited to posit as to how the institutional setup in a tribal economy does not warrant efficient play of the market forces. So fifth section positions the locus of the state government and its fiscal policy in the state development thus far. It then postulates the unique position of the state government in resolving the apparent duality and taking the economy on a quad path that takes the base of the market economy while simultaneously preserving Naga traditional rights to resources. So this section titled Market and Economic Development is the central argument of my paper. It is agreed by almost everyone interested in development today that solely leaving development processes to market does not bring about desired result, particularly inclusive development. Market, to begin with, knows only one language, price. It works through the price mechanism and works best when property rights are well assigned and enforceable. However, more often than not, the institutional setup in the tribal economy does not warrant efficient play of the market forces. For one, price can undervalue and undermine various non-economic factors important from a tribal community point of view. Moreover, market left to itself produces negative externalities, including environmental threats, which we will see in the context of Nagaland as well below. Notwithstanding all this, however, since the 1990s, the development policy approach in the tribal inhabited northeastern region has been led by neoliberal paradigm, which essentially calls for the market to be the prime mover of the economy. Nagaland, with its sister states, is trotting this path, which is proving unsuccessful. So following are two instances of failure of market-based approach to development in the context of Nagaland state. So the first instance, oil exploration and extraction. Nagaland is reported to have a reserve of around 600 million tons of oil, which could be worth more than $260 billion a year. The central government-owned ONGC carried out an exploration at several places in the state. However, it was stopped and abandoned after protests from several civil society groups based in the state in 1994. This is cited from Majumdar, 2014. In 2012, Nagaland state government claimed control of the oil plugs from the central government under Article 371A by passing Nagaland Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulations and Rules 2002. As per customary law, resources both above and beneath the land belong to the owners of the land. However, it is crucial to note that the community at large has the dominant say and sometimes the final say, as is the case in most tribal societies. Thus, in case of Chambang oil fields in Wokha district, opposition and protest by the tribal bodies, Lotha Hoho, the apex tribal body of the Lotha tribe, Kohima Lotha Hoho, a Lotha tribal body based in Kohima city, and other tribal leaders and the apex tribal students union, namely Lotha Students Union, and the filing of PIL by Kohima Lotha Hoho before the Guwahati High Court have stalled the starting of oil extraction, although a contract has been awarded by the state government to a private company, Metropolitan Oil and Gas Private Limited. Much of the controversies also surround the lack of transparency and the irregularities in the state's government process of awarding the contract to the above-mentioned company. However, without going into the nuances of the case, I would like to emphasize that this is the case standpoint that market-based approach, which premised upon individual property ownership by the government to enter into an agreement for developmental activities involving land and resources beneath land may not work. For the landowners are hardly an individual in a tribal society, but are a group of individuals, a clan, a village, or sometimes the land will fall within the territory of 2 or more villages, making the negotiation more complex. Also, notably, landowners are one among the multiple stakeholders, which include authority-wielding tribal bodies. Such a problem is not limited to extraction of oil, but faced generally in land acquisition for various developmental projects, such as railways, airport, road expansion, and such like. Quote, on land acquisition, compensation to landowners is a real hurdle, as was the case in the decade-long delay of the Tansri-Zubsa rail line project. Chief Administrative Officer of the project, Ajit Pandit, is reported to have stated that the project would meet the March 2020 deadline, provided the process of land acquisition poses no roadblock. Unquote, 2020. A kind of consensus approach by taking the whole stakeholders into confidence is thus called for. In the absence of consensus, given the communitarian institutions, and I quote again, and the tradition of ethnic tribal bargaining, such a development policy might create scope for corruption for the elites, as alleged in the current instance, while creating a development catastrophe for the masses, unquote, from Mishra and Opatia, 2017. So we have seen the case of state intervention in oil exploration. So in this section, unregulated coal mining, we take a case where the state fails to intervene or regulate extractive economic activity. Unmindful of the coal mining licensing policy under Nagaland Coal Policy 2006, unregulated coal mining is being carried out in some pockets of the state like Mokokchung, Mond, Tuensang, and Wokan districts. Recently, the state government has passed Nagaland Coal Policy First Amendment 2014 and the Nagaland Coal Mining First Amendment Rules 2014 to crack down on what it considers illegal mining. However, from the miners' perspective, who are usually the landowners themselves or leased out to them by the landowners, they don't see the livelihood activity as illegal. For customarily, they are working on their own lands or with the consent of the landowners. It is reported that environmentally unsafe mining practices continue, causing negative social externalities, including pollution of nearby rivers and areas, health hazards, and so on. It calls for the government to intervene, but as argued earlier, not like in other economies where market-based approach works, but in a unique way that considers the idiosyncrasies characterizing the economy in question. I suggest in passing that regulation by involving the institution of village council, which has been serving as a traditional institution of village governance, may work better. That is by strengthening communitization. So the subject of communitization is taken up later. So the way forward. As is shown in the foregoing discussion, most of which I skipped, the state's economy is in doldrums. And what is of more concern is the government's approach and policies, or rather, government's policy inertia is not likely to sail the economy forward. What is pertinent is to understand the unique economic circumstance of the Naga society, characterized by unique tribal institutions and customs safeguarded by constitutional provisions. Blindly applying the logic of market economy to develop the state will only lead to obstructionism, heavy social cost, and alienation of the people, as has been already discussed. Thus, it is imperative to reform institutions when need be, have consultations with all stakeholders, consider multiple landholders and tribal bodies for any development project, and strive for a consensus approach to development. The overall approach must be a broad-based approach rather than a piecemeal approach with untenable and unrealistic economic goals. So we may find a cue to usher in progress in the noted success stories of communitization. So now on communitization. So communitization is an initiative of the state government through the Nagaland Communitization of Public Institutions and Services Act 2002. The state government delegates powers and functions to the local communities to own and manage. Yes, ma'am.
You can start winding up now. You have 2 more minutes left.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I'll be able to finish in 2 minutes. So to conclude, the problem is not one of missing or lack of institutions. It is more of how to reconcile the constitutionally protected traditional institutions and modern democratic and economic institutions. The government taking the lead along with the Nagaland civil society, Naga civil society, which is quite influential in the state, must take initiatives and provide for a mechanism to resolve the apparent duality of the old and the new. For a broad-based consensus approach to development is the best way to sell economic projects forward, which at the moment are inhibited by lack of consensus among stakeholders and in economic activities where the state let the market have a free hand, there are negative externalities. So such a consensus approach will also help the Naga society to preserve its traditional institutions while enjoying the benefits of modern economic development. So thank you. I'm done, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, do we have time for questions? If there's any questions, the time is given now to any of the papers.
I'm afraid, ma'am, we don't have much time for questions.
So we will not be taking any questions, is it? And I don't think there are any questions also. So I will conclude then. I do not see any questions in the chat box too. So thank you everybody, to all the paper presenters and to the session organizer. I would like to conclude by saying that we've had very amazing 6 papers, and that we have seen very rapid transformations in the social, political, cultural, traditional, and community structures. And these have occurred in the Naga society ever since the creation of the state. The community wisdom, that is, the community wisdom which sought the welfare of the people, has been replaced by the aspiration of the individuals or the politicians and the political party affiliations. Arguably, in this change, the process of decision making of the community has undergone a tectonic shift. In all the topics presented today, the understanding of the issues by the community and its impact is really very critical. There is an increasing need for scholars, researchers, and educational institutions to engage in and with decision-making organs in communities in a structured and regular manner. This will assist in enabling community leaders to interpret the shifting times and guide them to respond appropriately and make informed decisions. Now, I think you all will agree with me when I say that there is a volcanic gap between the decision makers, the researchers on one hand, and the community structure. So I hope that the papers presented today, they materialize into published work, which again I hope will percolate to the community structure and finally play a role in policy decision making for our state. Thank you. And with that, I think we have no more time. And thank you all for having me in this session, and to the paper presenters too. Would you like to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for very effectively chairing the session and very efficiently managing the time. We have, of course, started a little late, 7-8 minutes late. So we are concluding right on time, I would say. And fortunate that by and large, we did not have much technical glitches. So I'm very happy. I want to also thank, on behalf of the Naga Scholars Association, to the 6 presenters, Dr. Riley, Inka, Teja, Shubham, and Pansy, Among, and Dr. Tamben for the wonderful presentations. And also the rapporteurs, Dr. Chiban and Yi Hingley, and to all the participants for very patiently listening and attending. Of course, we are sorry to say that we didn't have much time, and thank you for respecting the time from the participants also. There was no question. So we have another session coming up at 6. So we have parallel technical sessions. One is parallel session A2 on the theme Health and Society, and second is B2 on religion and world view. So you can join us in the next session also through the same link. So I invite you to kindly join us even in the next session. So from there, we will wind up our session. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Okay, let me come in for a while.
Hello.
Okay. Thank you
Yeah,
very
sure,
much,
sure.
Dr. Phupen, for effectively, managing the session. And I also would like to thank, Dr. Mimi for sharing the session so effectively. And thank you to all the presenters, speakers. Thank you very much for your, for the kind of perspectives you have given on the topic which you have presented. Thank you very much. We will continue for the next session. Either you stay and join the next on the same the parallel session for this, or you may shift to the other one. So it's up to you, whichever session you would like to join. But we are not locking it out. We will continue to, whomsoever wants to join this session, they can continue to be here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Zuchamba. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah.